I'm going to introduce Tanya Denckla Cobb. We're very happy she's here with us today to moderate this panel. She's the director of the UVA Institute for Environmental Negotiation, which is a public service organization with 35 years' experience as facilitators and mediators helping agencies, nonprofits, and businesses make decisions using a collaborative approach. Tanya co-founded the Virginia Natural Resources Institute, VNRLI, and in 1999, many of us are familiar with that, and continues to serve as teaching faculty for it. And she has her BA in government from Smith College. We're thrilled that she's here with us today. Thank you, Tanya, if you want to come on up. And thank you, gentlemen, for being with us today for this panel.
Great. I want to, wow, this is a powerful mic. I just want to say this has been an incredible lineup today, and just to give a shout out to Elizabeth and her team for an amazing lineup so far. Just thank you. And setting the stage for this great panel here. I think you have now been told by the previous panel that it's up to you. It's all on you. Okay, so now you guys get to have some fun here with what does that mean? We've heard from the beginning, great discussion of the many complex challenges that are facing our working waterfronts. And of course, we've also heard that challenges is a nice way of saying that we have a hotbed of conflict that is waiting and needing to be resolved. And of course, there's another way. We've also heard from Albert Pollard that there's another way of thinking about that and reframing that is many opportunities are awaiting us. And so I think thinking about these challenges or these opportunities, however you'd like to think about them, would love to hear from each of you in a few words, maybe a story, a challenge that you would like to highlight from your district, and then also how you might imagine that this challenge could or might be addressed, and if there's anything in the hot off the presses working waterfront plan that might help in addressing it. So I'm wondering, would somebody like to start, or should I name somebody? Maybe we start with Senator Lewis.
Oh, sure.
Okay. All right.
Well, first of all, I want to thank everybody who participated in formulating the master plan, and I've taken a cursory look at it, and obviously Kurt Smith and Louis were instrumental in that, and it does hold, for those of us in policymaking positions, it holds a lot of good information and guidelines in what we need to do. Has to one issue in particular that I think from my sprawling district that would be leaps into mind at the outset is one that really just resulted from a study that was performed by the committee that Kurt referenced in his remarks, and that was about the dredging needs that we have on the two counties on Virginia's Eastern Shore, and it's of course a Commonwealth-wide issue. You know, we've got the 8th largest amount of shoreline in the entire country. And Virginia is spending, I think, something like $1 million on maintenance for those efforts. And so obviously with the lack of money from the Army Corps and also the state's obligation, we've got a significant problem there that we need to figure out how we're going to address when we talk about the viability and continued economic vitality of working waterfront communities. So I think that's probably, because of recent events, that's one of the more foremost things. I want to touch really quickly, and I'm sure we'll get into it as the discussion progresses, on something that Jack said a little while ago in the previous panel, and that's the conflicts issue. And certainly that's been something that always percolates up to the General Assembly, depending upon which side that loses at the local level has the most resources. And so that's where we're going to find ourselves when we reconvene in January with yet another conflicts issue probably yet to resolve at the state legislature, which in my opinion is probably not the best place to resolve conflict issues like that. But as Jack said, I've sat at the dais in the Ag Committee, on the Senate Ag Committee, and on another local issue last session, or the session before, that percolated up. And this fellow was aggrieved with the conflicts of usage of the waterfront, and was circulating pictures. And one of the egregious uses of the waterfront had a dock with a bunch of crab pots piled up on the end of it. And I leaned over to my seatmate and said, "Well, hell, that looks like home." And so, you know, there you have it in a nutshell. So there's some of the things I think that of immediate concern, and then I know we'll get into some of the other suggestions of the master plan that I think are important too.
Okay, great. Thanks. Well, why don't we go to Delegate Bloxom?
I'd like to dovetail with a little bit with what Lynn said and put a different spin on the dredging. The inland passage has been abandoned by the Corps. And what they're actually doing is going to be cutting the poles off 2 feet above the bottom, even though the bottom moves a lot. And I guess the biggest problem I would see is that if the counties took on the responsibility of dredging, which the counties on the Eastern Shore, we own their boat ramps. It's not owned by VDOT. I think Keith has a different problem because I think VDOT handles their boat docks. Ours are county owned. So we have a team that goes out, we repair docks, we do all that ourselves. And we also dredge in the boat. We have some capability of doing that. If we expanded that to dredging, a shallow water dredging, we would still have to go through the Corps' permitting process because they're still federal waterways, even though they've abandoned them. And we've had this discussion back and forth. Of course, my opinion is if you abandon it, you give it up, and then the state gets it back. The other thing about conflict, we'll move off of dredging, the conflict issue. And they touched on it a little bit in the panel before us, but the state bottom. It isn't owned by the counties. The counties really, and once you get below the low water mark, it is a state issue, and all conflicts historically have gone to the VMRC. And that's where your conflicts have always been handled. And it's similar to what Lynn said, if you lose in the VMRC and you have enough money, then the issue will come up to Richmond. Good, bad, or indifferent, that's kind of the way it works. Of course, now you've got to understand my background. My background is I grow oysters. It's one of my companies. So I have a definite opinion on the conflict issue, but we won't even go there because I listened to a lot of the Virginia Beach. I went to almost every one of the Lynn Haven meetings and I was just a fly on the wall, if you will say. I just listened to all of them, but I was there. So I definitely have a definite opinion on some of those conflict issues. And of course, we can get into that. But I think the biggest problem we're going to have on the Eastern Shore is with their islands moving back. In my lifetime, the inland waterway, some of it is in the ocean. And the beaches are rolling back so quick, and our waterways are filled with silt, we're going to have to come up with a program, in my mind, at a local level, to do shallow water dredging ourselves. Whether you spray and it's not spoils, it's materials that can help build a marsh up, or there are any number of studies that show that we need to think in terms of this is an opportunity to help rebuild our marshes, to build them up, and we can just have a program that runs up and down the shore, shallow water dredging, and you're spraying the spoils, not spoils, but the resource on a marsh. With that, I'll give it to Keith.
Great, super. Okay, so we'll go to Delegate Hodges. Thanks.
Well, thank you. And first, thank you for organizing the event and your hard work on the master plan. And the first thing I learned when I was elected is I quickly had to learn that, I had to work on many other issues besides healthcare. I'm a pharmacist, but I grew up in the Middle Peninsula, we have a long, rich history of the seafood industry and our working waterfronts. I actually worked the water with my uncle, and I've seen the working waterfronts over the years disappear. And I also quickly learned that being a legislator is much more than making laws, amending laws, and repealing laws. It's about pulling folks together and finding solutions and resolving conflicts, and oftentimes between constituents, state agencies, and, you know, and others. And one of the first conflicts that I was asked to sit on and find a solution was with what is now the largest aquaculture facility on the western side of the bay. And I quickly learned that the permitting process and our agencies are often siloed in how they think, and they need to think a little bit differently to fit the business model in today's world. And in this instance, you know, when the permitting process, there were some holdups in VMRC. Then it ended up at the Department of Health. And in this particular case, the business was using floating barges that had solar panels that would run the upwellers that would sit out in the water. Well, the health department said, well, if these barges and these, they call them oysterplexes, are out in the water, you need hand washing stations and bathroom facilities on these. Now, as far as I know, all a waterman needs when they're working the water is a 5-gallon bucket and a lid. Am I correct with that? That's not the case here. So there was 6 to 9 months in delays on trying to find a solution for this. So we finally called a meeting with the owner of the business, the health department. We had a number of folks there where he presented, all right, this is what it's going to look like. We have to redesign these. They're going to be built up the river and come down. So they worked through all of that, and they said, well, you know, you need a threshold over here if someone's getting sick so it doesn't run over. They had even designed a barge with an outhouse that could float out in the middle of the creek. Now, would you want that floating over your oysters? I don't think so. So finally, we had met now probably an hour and a half, and I said, can you just have a head on a boat? Yeah, that's fine. That's all it took. It's a simple solution that was needed in this case. So what we have is we have conflict here between our agencies and how they interpret the regulations, how the laws are interpreted, and we need to modernize our thinking process when working on these issues. And we need to look at our laws, our regulations, and, you know, as General Assembly members, to work with all of the stakeholders and bring them together. Because at the end of the day, we all have to work together. And you know, it's about finding solutions. Also, one of the largest challenges that we have as legislators is educating other legislators in Richmond about how different we are, and to educate them on the challenges and the obstacles that we face, whether it's economic development, you know, the working waterfronts. And I don't know about coal, but they don't know about, you know, rural coastal Virginia. So it's our job to educate them on our needs and to take that message to Richmond. So,
Wow.
thank you.
Very rich, excellent. And I have an agenda here, so I'm really restraining myself from jumping in and asking off-the-cuff questions. Maybe I'll get a chance to do that. But let's move to then the second half of this, which is for the issues that you've identified. And Delegate Hodges, you've already started to talk about this as your role as a convener, your role as in a way, a kind of a mediator, right? And that in that sense, that you can see a path forward for resolving some issues. But I'm wondering if I can maybe pin you all a little bit, push you a little bit harder to be more specific about some of the specific issues that have been raised, that you've raised, and how you think they might be resolved more specifically. And if there is anything in the Working Waterfront Plan that you think might be helpful. And do you want to kick that off, Delegate Hodges?
Well, thank you. Well, of course, our biggest challenge, of course, is money. As you know, the pot is only so big, and we talked about redirecting some funds earlier in the previous presentation. But as you redirect funds, of course, there are going to be winners and there are going to be losers. So you're always going to have a fight on your hands. That's the number one challenge. And anytime there's a bill that has a fiscal impact, for instance, if we wanted to establish a working waterfront preservation income tax credit, maybe one possibility. But we also have to find a way to offset that fiscal impact in our state budget. One thing that we could look at, of course, would be a Working Waterfront Preservation Act. Is something that we could put on the table that could establish a legislative study committee to review the viability of our working waterfronts. And we also need to look at giving tools to our localities to establish working waterfronts. And I think those are probably our top priorities, the low-hanging fruit, I guess you could say.
Excellent. Three key pathways forward. Maybe we'll just come down the line here.
Well, I think to piggyback a little bit on what Keith said, first of all, the redirection of funds, which was a topic of regarding the fuel tax, which is a topic that came up in the last panel. Keith's right. I mean, that's sort of like squeezing a balloon. The problem's going to pop up somewhere else. See, when you redirect these funds and you do it for a period of years, they develop their own constituency at the receiving end. So it's going to be hard probably to shake that loose, although it's certainly worthy of discussion. But I think one of the recommendations of the master plan, and I think something that I have seen work in Richmond with other issues, is the focus of a study. And I know people think that's kicking the can down the road, and oftentimes it is a method by which you just kind of shove an issue to the back burner. But I mean, we have seen good studies result in good legislation. I'm on the sea level rise study committee right now, and we've had some good legislation come out of that, and we're getting ready to have some more recommendations that I think are going to have some legislative success of significance come out of that. So I think it's important. Plus, it focuses the assembly on the issue, and it brings the issue up to the forefront, and it gives it the spotlight it deserves oftentimes, especially if the membership of the study committee is good and active and willing to take a leading role on legislative recommendations that come from that committee. But the things that Keith also said that are key, I think, making sure the localities have all the tools that they need, because at the end of the day, as I indicated earlier, most of these decisions are most appropriately made at the local level, because that's presumably where things are more reflective of an area's culture, its economic development, and where it wants to go as an area. And so to make sure that they have the tools to do what they need to do. We can't give them the political will necessarily all the time to do it, but at least we can make sure from Richmond that they have the tools. But things like waterfront development areas, and tax credits, all of those things are certainly worthy of exploration. But again, I think really first and foremost, I'd like to see us put a spotlight on these issues with a comprehensive study.
Okay, super. All right, and so we go to Delegate Bloxom.
Well, I think that if you're just going to ask for funding from Richmond, I think everyone pretty much probably knows the answer is no. The funding streams that have been diverted, as Lynn said, somebody's going to fight for you not to get that fund. Most of the time when you bring up a funding request in Richmond, I have found that if you match it with funds, if you come up with a stream of revenue from the locality, if Accomack or Northampton's willing to put up X, and the state sees that for every dollar they spend, they're actually getting a $2 benefit, I think you have a easier sell. So I think that the localities are really going to have to think hard if these waterfronts and navigable creeks are valuable, which in my mind they are, then you need to figure out how valuable and how much money is the locality willing to put up. And if the locality is willing to put up money, I think it's going to be easier to find money. The flip side of that is if you can get away from doing the $3 million 3-year study that the Corps is famous for, and you don't come under their umbrella quite as stringent, then I think a lot of the shallow water dredging is reasonably cheap. And I say that with tongue in cheek, but I mean, but the Corps they're famous for 3 years and $3 million to do a study. That's not the cost of anything but studying it. Well, you kind of know what you need to do in a shallow water creek where you've got 2 feet of, sludge. It's not that hard to figure out that, oh, what we really want to do is blow the channel out. So if you can get away from some of the regulation of the federal government, then everything becomes cheaper. Then the matching becomes much more palatable on a local level. So I think the localities are really going to have to decide if it's important. They're going to have to put some money up and then ask for the money.
Okay, and I'm looking at okay, great. So have just a little bit of time before we open it up. So what I'm wondering is about your role, and you've already touched on it a little bit, your role as legislators. People are looking to you to make things happen, and yet you're also saying that in a way the General Assembly is the worst place to resolve issues, and yet you also as individuals have tremendous power to convene and to bring people together. And so I'm wondering, on any of these issues that you've talked about, can you see a role for how can our legislators as individuals, but also together as the General Assembly, become less reactive and more of what has been talked about in previous panels, of being proactive, of helping to bring the counties together or the groups together to help address these issues, to get ahead of the game, to get ahead, right? So that we're not always in the reactive mode. Yeah. Yeah, well, you are, yeah. I can see already. Go for it.
Either way, we all work very well together as legislators. Rob and I are seatmates. We work very well together. We work well with Delegate Ranson in the Northern Neck. But one of the things we really need to do is work well as a region. Southwest Virginia, the coal region, they're not mining coal. We focused on that region for economic development. Southside Virginia, the tobacco region, they're not growing tobacco. They focused on that area for economic development. We have our challenges here in rural coastal Virginia, and we need to really get together and look at how we can function as a region to take our message to the General Assembly so that we're all on the same page, that we have a coordinated effort in moving forward. One thing we're looking at now is introducing legislation, or I'm looking at right now, is introducing the Rural Coastal Virginia Economic Development Act of 2017, which brings together the Northern Neck, the Middle Peninsula, and the Eastern Shore to at least create an entity, an authority, to move forward with many of these recommendations. That way we're all on the same page, and we can continue to move forward and take that message to Richmond.
Great. Thank you so much. Senator.
And I think we talked about this a little bit earlier about what we can do as legislators. Obviously, we do have some of the greatest successes that I have had in my tenure in the House and now in the Senate has been in using the pulpit and being able to bring people together from the state and federal level to deal and discuss with problems. I always find that when you take the heat out of an issue by getting people in the same room, you can get things done. Everybody's not going to come out of that room and agreeing on the solution, but they're going to feel a lot better about the other side and the path forward. So that's one of the basic, more fundamental things that we can do. And we talked about educating our fellow legislators earlier. That's important. But again, providing tools to the localities for resolving some of these issues at the local level. The dredge report that we just talked about, I shamelessly stole a few years ago. I think it was from the Middle Peninsula, this Water Access Authority that enabled the two counties on the eastern shores before Rob got in the legislature, that enabled the two counties on the eastern shore to form this Water Access Authority to talk about dredging and access and how they're going to prioritize and come up with a comprehensive plan so they're not competing with each other, and they're being smart about how they approach the plan to utilize limited dollars for that purpose when they became available. So that's something I think important that we can do to, again, just help the localities deal with it at a local level. But so there's some of the things I think we can do.
Excellent, thank you so much. Delegate?
Well, I guess to add to anything, when you look at the number of bills that come in front of us in a 45-day period, I'd say a third of them are trying to fix a problem that we created last year. A third of them might be things that come up every year and you know they're going to come up and you've heard it and you know how you're going to vote. And then a third of it might be new stuff, the visionary stuff, the stuff that someone sees a problem and you try to fix. So those are the things that keep it interesting, I guess you can say, in Richmond. But really, it's I guess the position that we have, one of trying to promote a plan that you want or trying to bring people together. Lynn and Keith are right. I mean, that's really the role that we have, and trying to come up with the best solution. It's not going to be a solution that everybody likes. And there is sometimes when the heat gets so hot, the best answer is just no. Let's not change anything, and we're going to sit it out for a year, and we'll revisit it. Because when the heat's on, you're going to make mistakes. I mean, like I said, you've got 45 days, 3,000 pieces of legislation to look at. Is that about right? It's a quick workload, and I'd rather say no than to make a mistake. So the correct vote might be no until you get to look at it through a study, through a JLART, trying to figure out what's really happening in a situation. Sometimes that's just the best path forward.
I will say that not all that stuff comes from visionaries.
And so, based on what the three of you have been suggesting, it sounds like there is opportunity for, there's a proposal for regional collaboration, and there's a sense of the need to bring people together. And I'd love to hear more about the reality of the politics of that and how easy or hard that is going to be. But I'm being told I need to open it up. So you're saved from that question. Yes, ma'am. We'll go to you first. Yeah, yes, you had your hand up.
Mary Carson Stiff from Wetlands Watch. Thank you all for being here. Delegate Bloxom, you linked dredging to marsh creation, as did Kurt from the Eastern Shore. So is connecting sea level rise adaptation strategies to working Waterfronts initiative a helpful endeavor politically, or would it be hurtful? You mentioned the sea level rise joint subcommittee that you're on.
Recurrent flooding.
Sorry, recurrent. So that might be the nature of my question. Is it hurtful to link the two, or would it be helpful given the current local climate and the treatment of recurrent flooding in the Commonwealth?
Do I need to repeat the question for people in the back? So the question, if I've got it right, is it helpful or hurtful politically to connect the working waterfront plan with the other things that are out there, like the recurrent flooding and, am I getting that right, Mary Carson? Directly to recurrent flooding, or is it better to keep it separate politically?
All three of us are on that committee too, by the way. I think, and I'll let Rob and Keith speak for themselves, but I think I'm pleased to say, when I corrected you and said recurrent flood, I was joking, obviously. I do acknowledge sea level rise and firmly believe in it, and trying to do something about it. But that, at the outset, when we started down this road several years ago, we started with the VIM study several years ago. I mean, I was in a room, that was before these guys got there, I was in a room where we were trying to determine what we were going to call this thing, and we could not use sea level rise because we couldn't get it through. So we had to use recurrent flooding. So I have seen that attitude, I think, is my perception. I'll let these guys chime in as well. I have seen that attitude change, and there is an acknowledgement. I don't think it's politically as divisive and red hot as it used to be. I hope, I don't think. So I think there would be some benefit actually at this point, probably, in tying the two together, because obviously they are tied together. And so I think that would be, that's my thought.
Yeah, I think where they're interrelated, I don't see a problem politically either way with that, with your train of thinking on that.
And so, but is there anything that would push you to want to link them? Even though there's not necessarily a problem, is there?
Personally, I think you need to link them together.
Okay.
Personally, I think it would help you, help us. If you're trying to get to the dredging and trying to get to other pieces, that helps. It helps. I mean, all studies show that a vibrant marsh saves Norfolk, saves, it's just what you need. You need marsh grass to absorb any type of flow you've got coming in, and it filters going out. So any marsh ground you can get is a benefit to the creek or to the town. So, I mean, I think that's just something that ties together, that you need it in the argument.
Great. So politically, not so difficult to tie them together and actually synergistic to do so. Great. Great question. And yes, sir, behind. Yep. Yes.
Related to the idea of a comprehensive plan and the issue of squeaky wheels getting things done, back when I was in elementary school, we saw lots of, in Virginia, I went to elementary school here, we saw lots of film strips about the fisheries industry, clams and oysters and everything else. That has declined significantly since back when I was there. If the Chesapeake Bay is restored, there would be potential for a significant growth in the seafood industry in the state. Those people aren't here. They aren't able to squeak because they don't even exist. Whereas the people that are making a lot of these decisions, or who are adversaries to the things that people here are probably interested in, they aren't here. So I was just doing a back of the envelope calculation just for the Lynnhaven River. If things were ideal, the revenue from oyster production would probably be on the order of $300 to $500 million just in that one body of water. But none of that is being considered in terms of the economics of a lot of these plannings, and I think that it's important to include that throughout what the coastline and the potential of the Chesapeake Bay estuary in bringing economy, significant revenue back to the state, that needs to be included as part of the plan. So I wanted to mention that since I won't have a chance probably until next year.
Great question. Terrific question about how do we account for stakeholders who aren't at the table and who aren't given a voice, and yet have tremendous interest in the outcome. So, you're looking at me? Okay.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
We were all looking at you. Well, representing the Middle Peninsula, we do see that, the industry is the economic driver in our region. 72% of our workforce drives out of the Middle Peninsula to work each and every day. 72%, leaving behind a workforce. We have the lowest wages in the state. And, the seafood industry, the water, that is the economic driver in our region. And one of the things that we've identified, there are 23 different programs that just deal with water quality and water resource management to protect the Chesapeake Bay. Going back to the Clean Water Act in the early 70s, through ENS, Stormwater, the Bay Act, all of those things. What they all do is they protect the water quality and they protect the bay. We like it like that. That's what we want to do. And we want to be good stewards of the bay. But what that has done is that's actually tied our hands for economic development within our region. So the cost of doing business in rural coastal Virginia that we all represent is here versus the rest of the state. So we're basically paying for the sins of the rest of the state because of where we live. So we need to look at economic development in a different way, which hopefully, you know, with the Rural Coastal Virginia Economic Development Act, we can start to do some of those things. And one of the ideas is, it gets a little complicated and not really for this forum, is, you know, they're saying basically you're a big green space, you're a big state park. I don't even have a state park in the Middle Peninsula. So how do we adjust for that, and what do we do? So we need to look at our economic drivers, the seafood industry. We need to look at the land that we have and the resources that we have and find a way to commoditize that in a different way. And there's a model we're looking at around the rest of the country to do that. I don't know if that really answers your question, but we need to look at a totally new economic development model within these regions, because we want to protect the bay. We value that, but when we think about economic development and think of that in Richmond, we think about bricks and mortar. We need to think of it in a different way, and it's our job as legislators is to take that message to Richmond and to sell that to the other legislators.
Thank you so much. We have less than a minute left, and I'm wondering if there's 2 words that you might want to add on about economic development, and then we'll go to lunch. And anything else you want to add on?
Well, economic development, I mean, there are a lot of rules that get handed down to us from the EPA. DEQ handles them now. A good example would be, you know, a new road put in now on the Eastern Shore costs probably 7 times what it did 10 years ago, because in one waterway, they've got 7 retainment ponds, which actually hold water because we're too low to dig a retainment pond, but we have to do the same regulations that they do in Richmond or in other parts of the state. So, you know, and I've asked, VDOT's been very helpful, you know, to show problems to DEQ, which then push it up the line and say, you know, these don't work here, but we still have to do them here. So, you know, you put an inch block waterway dam to slow the water leaving. The problem is you just flooded a 60-acre field. You know, the reasoning, there's no common sense in some of this stuff. So, yeah, some of the problems that we're going to have is a one size does not fit all in coastal Virginia. And as far as taking the value of oysters, the Eastern Shore definitely understands the value of the oyster and seafood industry. The Lynn Haven, not so much. I mean, you know, been there, I've heard that. So, but in Richmond, it definitely understands the value of oysters and the production, wild stock production.
Okay, great. Senator, any last word?
I think Rob is correct. I mean, there are certain segments we clearly recognize the economic development value, and we just have to convince others of it and bring them along. And I think Keith's on to something with the regional approach. I hope he's going to flesh that out, and we're going to explore that as well. So, but I just want to take the last second that I have here again to thank you all for putting, the Coastal Policy folks for putting this forum on. Great to see such a robust attendance. It's fantastic. I see some old friends out there. So, and thank you for having me be a part of it.
Well, on that note, I'd like to thank the delegates and our senator for an amazing panel. Thank you so much. Great.
Thank you. That was such an important conversation, because looking around the room, there's so many people that have been involved with the General Assembly in one way or another for years. And I think all of us would agree with you, and I see our new Senator Monty Mason was in the back of the room too. He probably would agree with you too, that the General Assembly is just not the best place to deal with some of these issues because you're so limited in time. And it's something to keep in mind. This theme this morning has been communication is key and planning ahead. So thank you all very much for coming and doing this.